identity documents. And they say it's up to Cyril to identify how they identify. They don't use he or she, they use the word they, but it's really singular for this one baby. So when they are old enough to develop their own gender identity, that's when they get to decide what gender they are. And the child's parent is all on board for this. The mom says, I'm not going to foreclose their choices based on an arbitrary assignment of gender at birth. I guess that's arbitrary now. If we get to decide by looking at a baby what gender that baby is. This is craziness, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to have to talk about it because it's actually taking hold in North America, in Canada, and to some degree here. So we are going to discuss that. We hope that you will stick with us for the whole 2 hours, and a little bit later we will open the phones to give you a chance to weigh in on some of the good points that are made and also some of the nonsense that's being discussed and actually put out there as public policy. I don't really know how to react to some of it, but we'll get some experts to help us do that. So stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be back after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Pastor Ray Johnston has a new book out that talks about how the church has become like the culture. He illustrates this by describing the 7 decades that have changed everything. We talked about these remarkable changes recently on my radio program. The 1950s were a time when America lost its innocence. Rock music was born. Teenagers were liberated from their parents by cars. Every home got a television set. The 1960s were a time when America lost authority. America was on the eve of destruction, with protest about civil rights in the Vietnam War. It was a decade of drug use, Woodstock, and the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. The 1970s were a time when Americans lost love. It became the me decade after the disillusionment that took place in the 1960s. In the 1980s, Americans lost values as people got preoccupied with glamour, fashion, wealth, and media. The movie Wall Street may have summarized the decade with the phrase, greed is good. Then in the 1990s, Americans lost faith with the jarring images that occurred during that time. The 2000s were a time when Americans lost security. It began with a concern over Y2K, but moved from a scare to a real fear when terror struck on September 11th, 2001. And the 2010s seemed to be a time when Americans lost hope. They weathered the Great Recession, but did not believe that the future would be better than the past. Of course, Christian faith has the answers to these challenges. We can find innocence in the forgiveness of God, love in the love of God, values in the Word of God, faith in the promises of God, and hope in God Himself. The real question is whether we in the church will bring this message. That is why Ray Johnston titled his book, Jesus Called, He Wants His Church Back. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and our next topic is something we don't often talk about here on Point of View, but it has to do with charity and also just aid to another whole continent across the world, Africa. And my next guest says that Christians act like socialists with regard to the poor in Africa. Sometimes we do some things that, in the name of helping, actually do not help the situation. He's been involved for years in Africa, and his name, as a matter of fact, he is a native of Africa. His name is Robert Smith, and he is an entrepreneur and also a philanthropist. And that's sort of the two-pronged sword that we use to fight poverty in Africa. There's certainly philanthropy, but also free enterprise. And Robert Smith has a passion for bringing hope and restoration to sub-Saharan Africa. And he was born and raised, as I said, in southern Africa. He now lives in the U.S., has been here since 1977. He is committed to developing pragmatic solutions to Africa using those two approaches. And Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Penna. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. And I did meet Robert and his wife, Merle, a few weeks ago, and we had such fascinating discussions. I wanted to bring him to the microphone here at Point of View to talk about some of these things that make a lot of sense, Robert. And first, I know that you have a charity that you've run for years, and sort of the impetus has been to deal with orphans in Africa, correct?
Correct. We started Agathos International in 2002, and the primary purpose was to get involved in what we were being really told by numerous sources, primarily sort of evangelical missionaries, of the terrible orphan crisis that came as a result of the AIDS crisis. And so my wife and I felt like, we didn't know how to deal necessarily with the AIDS crisis, but we certainly knew how to facilitate the rescuing and the caring of orphans. And so that got us involved in the beginning.
And what did you learn from that charity that led you to believe that you also needed to weigh in on the free enterprise side of things?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, it was very clear that the African communities were far better at looking after their own orphans than we were led to believe. And so our ministry very quickly turned from sort of rescuing and caring for orphans to just facilitating and encouraging, particularly evangelical churches, to reach out to the orphans in their own community, which then expedited and increased the number of orphans cared for, at the same time reduced drastically the amount of American money needed to care for them. We actually encouraged churches to care for orphans in their own community. And then secondly, and this was a huge paradigm shift for me and really put me sort of in my own comfort zone, sort of being a serial entrepreneur here in the U.S., and that is that, a young man about 2 years into our starting of a orphan care center in South Africa came running up to me and literally said to me, Mr. Rob, and this was after I'd asked him what was wrong with him because he looked a little disheveled. He said, "A terrible thing happened to me. I graduated from high school. I cannot find a job. I have no reason to live." And what really a light came on in my own head. What I realized I was doing is I was caring for orphans in distress, which is totally appropriate, but caring for them in an environment where once cared for and turned back into the community, the economic life that would normally create jobs just didn't exist or was very, very weak. And so that just turned my own understanding and my own quest into trying to become a job producer in the role in the way that God has designed me, so that I can end up helping the orphans that I've been involved in raising, and that's become a passion of mine, and is really my whole full-time pursuit at the moment.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about, and I've actually seen a video that you've produced on this, is that often we can actually hurt the business climate in countries that we try to help, either our government or our religious charities, because we displace the opportunity for people to provide goods and food and whatever in their own communities. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and this is a far bigger problem than I think we realize. And this is where I often joke with evangelicals that here in the U.S. we're very conservative with regard to charity. We're very generous, but we're very careful. We don't want to make people dependent. We like welfare rules that encourage people to go to work, that just help them temporarily, not permanently. And yet with Africa, we write huge, generous checks to to give free stuff away, thinking that somehow we're helping the poor. And the reality is that in the local market, God has blessed sort of this ecosystem, this human ecosystem that we have, with a percentage of us that simply are entrepreneurs. We see a need, and our drive is to meet that need and then feed our families in so doing. And as it grows, we then hire people who then feed their families, and the people who buy our products then have their needs met. And so in that ecosystem, it's completely disrupted when all of a sudden the very thing that I think I can make and sell for a profit gets given away free by some generous Christian group. And so some of the countries that I'm involved in, you can get everything you need for free from a Christian group. You can get your children's school fees, you can get their school uniforms, you can get their shoes, you can get your own shoes, you can get your clothing, you can get food. It's just there's nothing you can't get if you look hard enough, because we are so generous, and it is relatively easy to just go to your friends and neighbors and say, God has called me to meet this need in Africa. Please support me in the States. Start a 501c3. And next thing, you now have a salary, and you're giving free stuff away into an economy that desperately needs entrepreneurism and the free market to become rooted. And we keep uprooting it by disrupting the market with free stuff.
Why do we have this disconnect? Do we as Americans think that their governments are not going to allow the flourishing of free enterprise? Or, I mean, why don't we think about it the way we think about charity here in the U.S.?
I think that part of it is because it is, we haven't thought it through very often, and much of our sort of filtering has come from missionaries who are already in the mindset, and so they will come with bleeding heart stories, and very often, if you sort of follow those bleeding heart stories, they're actually not very deep, and the story might have even changed. And I've challenged some groups when they've brought sort of Mary. Look at Mary, we've helped her. Her life was terrible. Now it's great, just to say, show me where that has improved the economy of Mary's village, because it just doesn't do it. Even microfinance, it helps. You get the anecdotal story, but as a whole, microfinance, just puts the poor into more poverty, because now they're in debt and paying a disproportionately high interest rate, and so you just get a community becoming poorer and poorer, even though you have the anecdotal stories that move you. And we're such a caring community of particularly American evangelicals. We write the check very quickly when we're moved emotionally. And so it's very easy to say, look at Mary's children. They go to school without shoes, and your $20 can provide, 10 sets of shoes. And so we're moved. We don't want Mary's children to go to school without shoes, not realizing that if we allowed the free market to do its work and help Mary in other ways to become productive so that she can go to the local shoemaker that now has an opportunity to sell shoes because he's not competing against free, we would do much bit more for that economy in the long run than just writing a check to Shoes R Us or Shoes for Africa or whatever the organization I choose to start, because I'm moved myself by Mary's children having no shoes.
Robert Smith is my guest, and I'm going to ask him in the next segment, what are the wise solutions? What should be done? What is he doing with Earthwise Ventures? And I think you'll find it fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. Before the break, I do want to send you to pointofview.net. There you can find out about both of the organizations that we've been discussing here, Earthwise Ventures and also the philanthropic organization dealing with orphans. We have links to those at pointofview.net, and you can also go to Earthwise to find out more. But I do want to also send you there for another reason, and that is that our donate button is there. There's an opportunity to become a monthly partner with Point of View. We are listener supported, and we count on your gifts. And you could also join the Truth Team for Point of View. There are lots of ways to join and levels to join at, and we love it when people decide to support us monthly so that we can count on those gifts and so that we can take care of all the needs here that go into broadcasting a program like this every single day. We are on about over 300 stations across the nation, so if you want to help bring truth to your really brothers and sisters and others about some of these issues, join us at pointofview.net. And Rob Smith is going to stay with me for the next couple of segments. We're going to really dig into this issue and talk about Earthwise ferries. It's a great idea. We'll be right back with more of Point of View.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And on the line with me, ladies and gentlemen, is Robert Smith. He is an entrepreneur and philanthropist, and he works in Africa. He was actually born in Africa, but is in the United States now. And we were talking about how, Robert, charities can do harm if it isn't applied in the right way. And we're talking about the AIDS crisis in Africa. So, you know, if we do harm and we cause joblessness, in a sense, in an area, but we also have the aftermath of this AIDS crisis where there are all kinds of really needs for workers, people that aren't with us now because of AIDS. Is that, you know, that's another problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a problem that largely has been dealt with quite effectively in many respects, thanks to George Bush and the PEPFAR program. So in most of Africa, if you do have AIDS, you can get medication very inexpensively and cheaply. You know, what's far more of a problem is that, you know, the communities, you know, just don't have economic life, so just don't have jobs created. And so people stay poor because they remain, you know, they do anything they can, is subsistence farming or going into the major city, living in a slum, and then beginning their slow walk out of poverty as they become used to urban life and they start to become traders themselves. And the thing that thwarts that journey significantly is the ability for the marketplace to get free stuff from caring people who don't live in that community. And so the entrepreneur is just continually beat down because he can't sell his product because some bleeding heart group that cares a lot has raised a lot of money to give that same product to their customer for free. And
well,
so
one of the issues that you mentioned,
free market.
One of the issues that you mentioned, Robert, in your literature is the wonderful natural resources and also the, you know, thriving cities, some big cities, but then the distances between cities and where things are produced and getting things around. And that's what really sparked my interest when I saw you this time, the idea that you are actually helping to build infrastructure now in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's become very successful. So tell us a little bit about what you've done, how you've involved other people, and what's happening. You know, what are the successes?
Yeah, so let me just walk you through what I've done from the eyes of an entrepreneurial thinker, because that's how God has wired me. Once the light came on when this young man told me he couldn't find a job once he got out of high school, you know, what I realized is, you know, I needed to get involved with the way that God had gifted me in the areas of influence or the areas I'd chosen to work. And so we set up Earthwise Ventures with the goal of investing and starting companies in broken areas. But still, from every perspective, think of what we're doing as businessmen, meaning we need to make a profit, otherwise we won't be sustainable. We need to attract investors, not donors, which changes the whole scope of what you're doing, because if you have investors, they invest and it belongs to them. And so it's not like a donation that is given to an organization and then has been released by the donor, which gives a different level of accountability, even though it probably shouldn't. And so we began to look at the marketplace like we would over here, and that is, what needs can we meet and meet them in such a way that we can give a return to our investors. And what is very, very clear in so many parts of Africa, and that is that the infrastructure either doesn't exist or it once existed and it has become broken through mismanagement or naivety or just the transition of power from sort of the colonists who were very structured in their thinking to the local folk who then took over independence but didn't necessarily have the background to keep infrastructure going. And so we were observing that, you know, even indigenous farmers, you know, 50 miles from the city couldn't get their products to the city cheap enough because the infrastructure was so broken that their products would be non-competitive. And so the only market they had was their local market. And so that began our focus on infrastructure. And because I am a boat builder here in Seattle, we started looking at the opportunity to do something related to marine life. And if you know anything about Africa, there's the Rift Valley lakes, that just go from North Africa to southern Africa. And we began to observe, and our attention was drawn to the lakes by some of the folk we work with in Africa on a missional basis, to the fact that at one time there were robust ferry systems on all those lakes, so that you could be a cotton farmer, for example, in eastern Congo on the Nile River, close to the South Sudan border, and get your cotton to London, because there were ferries and trains that worked. This is back in the 30s.
What happened to them?
50s. They just came to a slow grinding halt after the independence, and again, largely because of naivety and just the lack of knowing how to continue to keep that infrastructure going. And much of that has been remedied in terms of maturing governments in Africa, but what has not been remedied is the continual investment by the market to bring those goods to robust markets, the major cities in Africa, and then, of course, exporting to other cities around the world. And so
doing it by water is much more efficient and better, and the roads aren't great anyway, correct?
Right. I mean, the cheapest form of transportation by far is water. You don't have to do a railroad or a road. The road has been provided there by God and by nature. And so if you can just create the means of transportation on water, it is the least expensive way to move people from a capital perspective, and then also just from a cost perspective. And so, and many of these places have historically have a combination of water and rail. So if the water came up to a point like a waterfall or something, then the rail would take over. And the rail system is also just completely fallen apart in Africa. And the difference between rail and water, though, is rail takes hundreds of millions of dollars to refurbish and to put back into place. And Africa will do that in time, because Africa is beginning to rise, whereas water takes just the cost of the vessel. So it's a fraction, probably less than 1/10 of 1% of the cost of resetting up the railway system or resetting up a highway system. If you have water, you can move goods very, very inexpensively relative to other ways of moving the product. And so that's what drew us into it, because we didn't have lots of money. We couldn't go and rebuild a railroad, but we certainly could build a boat. And so that started Earthwise Ferries, which operates now on Lake Victoria.
And I wanted to hear about the success. I want to also open up the phones at 800-351-1212. Come and join our conversation, ladies and gentlemen, especially if you have a question or comment for Rob Smith. And tell us, Rob, about the Lake Victoria Ferry Project. It's been a success. Tell us why you think it's so successful. And now you're expanding and recreating in West Africa, I understand.
Correct. Yeah, so Lake Victoria is the largest freshwater lake in Africa, the second largest by surface area freshwater lake in the world. So imagine a lake just slightly smaller than Lake Superior. At least 3 or 4 major cities on the lake, 2 of which have populations in the sort of 2 to 3 million person range. Those 2 cities are less than 200 miles apart, and it's almost impossible to get from one city to the other. So economically and even socially, those 2 cities are totally disconnected. So people in the marketplace in Kampala just have no ability to sell their product, particularly if they're fresh products, to people in Mwanza, the southern part of the lake. Historically, there was a robust ferry system that operated in the colonial days and continued to operate into the 70s, and then it began to break down. Little by little, the ships just got old or sank, and they were not replaced. The capital wasn't there to replace them. They weren't run with people sort of reimbursing, or just building up capital over the life of it out of their profits in order to replace them. So once the ships came to a halt, the system came to a halt. And so our goal has been to rebuild the connection between the cities on Lake Victoria. And it's been difficult for a number of reasons, but we are on our feet. And our next step, we have passenger ferries serving the lake, and our next step now is to actually start freight service with barges and tugs, very similar to what occurs between Seattle and Alaska, because that's the least expensive way to begin to move products from Kampala to Mwanza, Kampala to Kisumu, which are the major cities on the lake, and allow then manufacturers and suppliers from each city to reach a broader market, and then also begin to connect cities that are as close as Seattle is to Portland in the United States. And so it's a very exciting project. It's a project that is totally based upon investors investing in the idea of a business plan that will give them a return.
Let me jump in. We're on a break. I want to send people to earthwiseventures.com, especially if they're interested in learning more about investing or just what you're doing there. And we'll be back after these messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. $3.25 million. That's the price one New Jersey town will pay for its religious discrimination. Not long ago on this program, I told you about the refusal of Bernards Township, New Jersey, to grant a building permit to the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey. The society fought City Hall for at least 4 years, having their application denied 9 separate times. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit against the township, alleging a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Department of Justice won just 2 months later. But by May 2017, the township decided to give up the fight, settle with the government, and allow the Islamic Society to build their mosque. This is good news for religious liberty. Though Bernards Township, in this case, used their zoning laws to prevent the building of a mosque, it could have just as easily been a synagogue, a church, a cathedral, or other house of worship. City governments cannot intentionally throw up permitting obstacles to religious organizations. They must treat a religious organization's application for land use just like it would any other land use application. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Before the break, ladies and gentlemen, I sent you to the Earthwise Ventures website, and we are talking about Earthwise ferries and really helping the infrastructure in Africa with Rob Smith. And it says on the website, our goal is that each venture impact its local community by both directly creating jobs and by the creation of collateral jobs through suppliers of goods and services to the company and to the company's workers and their families. It's a multiplier effect. And we're discussing this with Rob Smith. I do want to take a call here. Ricky in Louisiana listening in on KPAE. Hi, Ricky. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want Mr. Smith's opinion on Dr. David Livingstone was the first missionary to Africa. In fact, he left his wife and I think 5 or 8 kids in England and spent his whole life in Africa and actually died. When they found him, he was on his knees at 4 o'clock in the morning praying for the Africans and died. And so you got to admit that David Livingstone probably had more insight to the African culture than any man before, since, or after he died, because he spent 50 years in Africa and died for the Africans. And anyhow, I just want Mr. Smith's opinion about what David Wilson summed up the African culture. Like I said, come from anybody else, you know, people might get offended, but come from Dr. David Livingstone that lived and died in Africa for 50 years, you have to admit, is from a man's observation. He loved the Africans and he died for them, but he said, and this could be the reason why they having such a struggle to, you know, infrastructure and building roads and all that stuff. But according to David Livingstone, and I mean, you know, you got to take it from, you know, what he said.
Yeah, what's the quote?
Well, his quote was that, as a whole, the African culture are lazy lots. That might explain why they're having so many problems over there.
Okay, well, Bob Smith, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's not been my experience. Certainly he went into a totally different culture where it was nomadic and agrarian. And, you know, I've got a brother-in-law who's a farmer, and in many ways his lifestyle appears somewhat relaxed, but he's up at 4 in the morning doing his thing, and then he comes back and, you know, has a relaxing morning, and then he goes back at lunchtime and is more working with his workers. I mean, you know, that's just, he was coming from a Western culture, the early time of economic development in England, you know, where hard work and the partisan work ethic was taking hold. And he came to an early Africa where, you know, those principles hadn't been taught. That's not the case anymore. I mean, Africans are exceptionally hardworking. If you go to Kampala, you will see them working till 10 o'clock at night. It's amazing how industrious they are. And so I think that was just a characteristic of two cultures clashing, you know, 250, 200 years ago, and certainly not the case anymore. I would totally disregard that comment at this point, and yet I would respect it in the time that it was made.
Rob, we just touched on the idea that you are expanding Earthwise Ferries and you're moving to other areas. And I also have a brochure in front of me, the big picture of a beautiful ferry called, it's amazingly beautiful, called Lightspeed. Tell us about it.
Right. Yeah, so Lightspeed came up for an idea. Two pastors came to me, Penna, from Liberia, just saying that they had such a difficult time just going 75 miles down the coast because the roads were dangerous. They were in terrible shape. At that time, there was civil war. Currently, there isn't, but that tends to come and go. And they just begged me to consider looking at putting a ferry system along the west coast of Africa, because all these cities from these many colonized and relatively small countries from a coastline perspective are connected by water, but poorly connected by a road system. Urbanization along West Africa happens on the coast because all the major cities are port cities. And so we began to look at what it would take to connect passenger service between all those cities. And what we realized we needed was speed and efficiency. And in the marine world, speed typically means inefficiency. You know, you can go slow very cheaply, but you can't go fast cheaply. But in the meantime, materials have changed so much that we're actually flying now this Boeing 787 with all plastic, all composite, extremely strong, very light vessels. And so we began to apply that technology to ferries and came up with basically a 50-mile-an-hour ferry that operates very efficiently. And we are busy raising capital now to build the first 2 ferries that will serve from Lagos, Nigeria, to Accra, Ghana, connecting 2 cities, again, that are as far apart as Seattle is from Portland. But right now it's a 13 or 14-hour bus ride, 3 border crossings, 2 different languages, multiple roadblocks, will be transformed by a 5-hour and 20-minute ferry ride at competitive prices. And not only do that and hire, probably 40 to sort of 60 direct hires per ferry, but also give the people who invest in it a return on their investment, which will then encourage them, we hope, to continue investing in African projects or African businesses. So we're very, very excited about it, and that ferry is going to be quite revolutionary.
Rob, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I wanted to inform our listeners about what you're doing, but also if there are people who are listening or people who know people that might be interested in joining your efforts or investing or being involved in some way. I've given your website, but I want you to kind of give some specifics on how people can become involved.
Yeah, well, there's two ways. Support entrepreneurs in Africa. Find ways to buy things in Africa as opposed to give things away in Africa. If we've had a fund of $100,000 and we went to Kampala and said, let's buy locally produced shoes, rather than raising $100,000 here to ship shoes that everyone has donated, the difference would be absolutely phenomenal. One would set up a factory or grow factories that hire moms and dads who then raise their children and template hard work. The other one sets up a social welfare program where people get free shoes. And so part of it is just change your thinking. You cannot end poverty by giving something away. You simply cannot do it. You can help the poor, and I'm not opposed to that, but you cannot end poverty by perpetually helping the poor. You end poverty by allowing the poor to become productive, which is the way God created us to be. We're all created in His image, and the first thing God did that we are aware of is that He worked. He worked for 6 days, and we're made in His image. We're most happy when we're producing more than we're consuming. And so endless charity just disregards the dignity of humankind, and yet we are so good at that as evangelicals. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, look for companies like Earthwise Ventures who are collaboratively, getting private equity money and then putting that to good work and ultimately giving you a return on your investment. And so you want to do that prudently and carefully and within the rules. The SEC is very strict as to how that can occur. But there are a number of companies, we might be called impact companies, but we don't compromise the bottom line. We're businessmen. We know that good business is what creates good jobs in the long run. And wealth is what creates the ability to employ people that are unemployed. And so we're very pro-wealth. The people that have impacted the world the most are the ones that end up being the wealthiest. And the job creators of the world, God blesses them with the ability to create more jobs because people want their product, and that allows them to make money, which then allows them to expand and hire more people. So I would just encourage people, when they're ready to write this check to some charity that is giving away free stuff, think twice. Just think, is this the most effective way to end poverty? And would you do that in your own neighborhood? To end poverty in your own neighborhood, would you just give away a bunch of free stuff? As Christians, we tend to be conservative, and we tend to think that's not the right way to help people that are dependent on welfare. We say, let's encourage them to get to work, let's encourage them to get a job, and yet in Africa we do the exact reverse.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me. Again, I want to send people to earthwiseventures.com, or you can click through at pointofview.net. But Rob, this has been fascinating. I hope you'll join us again.
Thank you, Penna.
Sarita is a Point of View listener in Georgia, someone probably a lot like you. Listening to your program, she writes, has helped me realize that I do have the power to conduct change in my area and this nation. And with all of the online tools you provide, this power has become even more apparent to me. What can one person do? A whole lot, says Sarita. And then she says, and together we can get even more done. She's right. Sarita is right. This is a moment of opportunity, and together with you, Point of View is looking to accomplish a lot. This program and those online tools she mentioned will only continue being available if we hear from people like you this week. Join Truth Team 360. There are many levels. Check them out. Choose the size of the part you can play at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for the second hour of Point of View. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was an important deadline that came and went over the weekend. On July 1st, that was the date that had been announced by the Obama administration that open transgender people would be allowed to join the military. And there was a delay in that date and that target. To discuss it with us right now is Elaine Donnelly, and she is president of the Center for Military Readiness. I have been bringing Elaine onto Point of View to discuss these issues for probably close to 20 years now. Elaine, it makes you feel old, but you've been working in this agenda that the military being used for social engineering, and it's hit now, I think, with an amazing force that we are actually to the point now where the military is figuring out and is prepared to allow open transgenders to join.
Yes,
does it surprise you?
Well, if you have followed closely, as we have, what the Obama administration did, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, none of this is surprising to me. However, it could be and should be to most other people who have no idea how sweeping and how radical and how illogical and harmful the transgender agenda is, as expressed in the official documents put out by the Department of Defense and the various military services under orders from the previous Secretary of Defense. His name was Ashton Carter. Most of this happened last year. And when it was ordered, people didn't stop to think, well, what does that mean? They came out with plans starting in October of last year. Most of those plans remained unexamined until now. Actually, we've been studying them and writing about them for some time, but we just released a CMR special report that presents and exposes and analyzes 15 different Department of Defense and military service directives, instructions, handbooks, briefings, mandatory briefings, all kinds of different orders to get the military to treat people who are confused about gender identity, that means they suffer from gender dysphoria, to accept them as a person of the opposite gender, even though science and common sense indicates that is just not the case.
So, Elaine, I mean, I've talked about dates and delays and things like that, but the reality is that because we had a date of July 1st, lots of time and money has been spent in the various branches of the military to get the military ready for this, hasn't it?
Right. That's exactly right. And that's what these documents that we have analyzed are all about. They start with a memorandum, an instruction, a directive from the Secretary of Defense, falsely claiming that gender orientation or gender diversity, gender orientation and identity, that this is a civil rights issue, that it's the same as sexual orientation, including this in the equal opportunity or civil rights categories that come under military equal opportunity law. Now, only a few years before, back in 2010, even the Obama Department of Defense warned against this. They said it would not be a good idea, that it would lead to special treatment for sexual minorities, and it would be problematic. Now, again, this is Obama's administration. But in 2015, the Secretary of Defense stumbled into this delusion. I don't think he even realized what he was getting into. He declared that under MEO policies, transgenders would become a special interest civil rights group. Now, if you take that step, then everything else follows from it. Then you have to provide medical treatment to persons who are confused about gender identity without limit. You have to
even the
justify
surgeries.
Oh yes, of course. These kinds of treatments are available right now to people in the military as of, I think, October of last year. So this has been going on for some time. Now, we don't know how this has been working out. The LGBT activists claim, oh, everything's great, but they're only looking at it from the standpoint of the transgender individuals, not the rest of the people, and certainly not the mission of the military as a whole. Now, the reason this affects far more people than just this small minority, and we have sympathy for people who are confused about gender identity. It must be a horrible way to live. And just imagine that. But we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of people, starting with doctors and nurses and commanders. These groups of people are ordered by these documents over and over again to either approve or participate in or perform gender transformation procedures that are based on unreality, the idea that you can change a man into a woman or a woman into a man based on superficial changes, like a hairstyle change or makeup or even surgery. But the truth is, and science says, that human DNA does not change. Human DNA is in every cell of every individual's body, and it is unique to that person. You either have XX or XY chromosomes, and those are the true gender markers that are with you from birth. But all the DOD documents get into this fiction that gender is assigned at birth. Assigned by who? They never answer that question.
Elaine, let me jump in a second, because
Sure.
Why it is, I mean, I can sort of see when you talk about this, and we know the science isn't there, but they target these things at an organization, an institution like the military for a reason. I mean, it's been that way with all these other methods or topics of social engineering, that because the military is top down and you have to obey orders,
Exactly.
the radical ideas actually flourish there sometimes.
That's right. It is a prime venue for social engineering. Always has been, because people have to follow orders. The orders in these documents are even more restrictive than what we've seen before. For instance, training briefing slides openly say, when you present these slides, in other words, the whole LGBT, the transgender plan, this is not a dialogue. This is a one-way presentation. Everybody is expected to go along with it, regardless of personal beliefs, even if they differ. You must act upon this ideology, regardless of personal beliefs. Now, there are a number of doctors and nurses who, for various reasons, whether it's religious conviction or personal conviction, personal experience, or, in many cases, medical ethics, who will resist this, but they will have no option. You see, operating on healthy body parts is, in the books of medical ethics, something that is unethical. How can you do that, especially when long-term studies have shown that so-called gender reassignment surgeries do not solve underlying psychological problems, including high risks of suicide? Now, our commanders have better things to do than to deal with these complicated medical cases. Enter the experts.
Wow.
The plan set up these cells, what are called, Service Central Coordination Cells, SCCCs. This is an official acronym.
Let's explain the cells after the break, because it's going to take more than 30 seconds to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Let's open the phones, 800-351-1212. If you have a question, or if you've been a member of the military and you want to make a comment, these are all going to be very quick, because I want to ask Elaine several more questions. And we have like a national treasure with us here on Point of View, if you've never heard Elaine Donnelly before. She is convicted about these issues. She studied them. She's provided information to the Trump administration. And we're just hoping that in this 6-month period, they make the right decision and that Congress weighs in to just stop this stuff, because it's nonsense. We'll discuss it more here on Point of View after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Pastor Ray Johnston has a new book out that talks about how the church has become like the culture. He illustrates this by describing the 7 decades that have changed everything. We talked about these remarkable changes recently on my radio program. The 1950s were a time when America lost its innocence. Rock music was born. Teenagers were liberated from their parents by cars. Every home got a television set. The 1960s were a time when America lost authority. America was on the eve of destruction with protest about civil rights in the Vietnam War. It was a decade of drug use, Woodstock, and the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. The 1970s were a time when Americans lost love. It became the me decade after the disillusionment that took place in the 1960s. In the 1980s, Americans lost values as people got preoccupied with glamour, fashion, wealth, and media. The movie Wall Street may have summarized the decade with the phrase, greed is good. Then in the 1990s, Americans lost faith with the jarring images that occurred during that time. The 2000s were a time when Americans lost security. It began with a concern over Y2K, but moved from a scare to a real fear when terror struck on September 11, 2001. And the 2010s seemed to be a time when Americans lost hope. They weathered the Great Recession, but did not believe that the future would be better than the past. Of course, Christian faith has the answers to these challenges. We can find innocence in the forgiveness of God, love in the love of God, values in the Word of God, faith in the promises of God, and hope in God Himself. The real question is whether we in the church will bring this message. That is why Ray Johnston titled his book, Jesus Called, He Wants His Church Back. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Elaine Donnelly, president of the Center for Military Readiness. If you'll go to pointofview.net, you can see Elaine's bio and picture and a link to her website where there's a lot of information, including the report that she mentioned, that's extensive and readable. It's about 27, 28 pages. I read most of it, and I recommend that you read it if you really want to understand this issue. There's also an article there in Military Times called "The Military is Building a Case to Block Transgender Applicants," at least for now. That's an interesting way of putting it, Elaine. But I do want to let people know that there are people in the military who think rightly about this. Yeah. And you know, there are leaders in the military that need to be listened to right now, aren't there?
Well, we know that 3 of the military services, not the Navy, but the Army, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, asked for a 2-year delay because they were having trouble, and probably still are, having difficulties figuring out how to implement new policies to recruit new people into the military who are transgender. That's what was supposed to happen on July 1 of this year. Now, I would like to know why they asked for that extension of 2 years. But the Secretary of Defense, I don't understand why, went along with a deal that was brokered by an Obama holdover, a Deputy Secretary of Defense by the name of Robert Work. Robert Work told the service chiefs, I don't want any testimony on how things have worked so far, but I want to hear your assessment of what should be done in the future. And they gave their assessment. They asked for 2 more years. But Bob Work whittled it down to only 6 months. Now, we're grateful for the reprieve, naturally. However, that just kicks it down the road to Christmas and New Year's. Now,
when nobody's paying attention.
Nobody's paying attention, and this sort of thing has happened before. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, previous administration, they always put the tough stuff off to the Christmas holidays when nobody was watching. And then, get this, everything that we're talking about is triggered to go into effect on January 1 of 2018. So we haven't solved the problem. The can was kicked down the road. This was a last-minute reprieve. However, there is so much work to be done. So one good bit of news, Representative Vicki.
I think we've just lost Elaine.
National Defense Authorization Act.
Okay, would you?
Yes.
We had a little blip in the audio. It's Vicki Hartzler, right?
Yes, from Missouri.
Okay, great. She's actually trying to get Congress to weigh in on this.
We don't know exactly what form or action she will take, but she's already shown great courage in sparking a debate. She talked about an amendment. She did not offer it for a roll call vote. It was very late at night. However, she started a very good, solid debate, and I don't know what it is that she'll do next, but we need to get behind her. We need to encourage her and thank her. It's the only way, I think, for Congress to start getting engaged in this issue. They've been vacant and looking the other way for far too long. She's taken the lead, and I'm very grateful that she has done that. But they need to look at these issues in terms of military readiness, in terms of deployability. When you have official documents, the ones that we analyze, saying, well, we know that transgender treatments might make a person non-deployable for months at a time, 3 to 6 months or maybe even a year for surgeries. We also see acknowledgments that in some countries, regions of the world, cross-dressing people are not welcome. In fact, they're greeted with violence, so that might make them non-deployable. We also know that the costs are open-ended. Family Research Council did just a partial study of some of the costs without even projecting out, well, let's see now, we have to include dependents. That means minor children, children who are vulnerable, who should not be subjected to transgender, irreversible hormone treatments or surgeries. I mean, just thinking about it, it's appalling.
You haven't even mentioned the privacy issues in the military.
Pardon?
And you haven't even mentioned the obvious privacy issues in the military.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's another thing. The official policy is that anyone who feels uncomfortable about a person of the opposite sex who claims to be of the same sex entering their showers and other private facilities, well, the people who object are the ones who have the problem. The transgender has the superior right to be there. Now, I'm not making this up. This is in the official policy prescriptions of the various services and the Department of Defense. We're the first ones to put the spotlight on this stuff. So I do encourage your listeners. You can pick any one of those 15 directives, any one. Take your choice. You can write a speech, you can write an article, you can write a letter to your congressman based on any one or all of them. This is what we're hoping will happen. But if there is action on the floor of Congress, this could happen in less than 7 days, next week.
Wow.
So there isn't a whole lot of time to act. Regardless of what happens in Congress, between now and the end of the year, there's got to be a lot of pressure, a lot of awareness. This is just the beginning of Congress becoming involved, and we've got a lot of work ahead to do.
Let's go to the phones because we've got Pete, who's a commander in Virginia in, I think, the Air Force, and he actually has a different opinion than you and I have kind of expressed here, Elaine. So let's hear from him. Hi, Pete. Thanks for calling in. Let me get you on. Okay, Pete, thanks. Sorry it took a second, but thank you for calling.
No, thanks for having me on.
What are your thoughts on this? Because I see from the notes here that you don't really agree with our position on this.
Now, I think that there's often lots of input from outside the military of people sort of thinking they know what's best for the inside of the unit and actually taking the responsibility and the command away from the person in charge of the unit to make these decisions on behalf of the health and welfare of their unit. And in this case, it's kind of being turfed, from what I'm hearing on your program, as, you know, our hands are tied in how we deal with the unit. Let me tell you from firsthand experience, I have seen how a unit can become more effective and better at its mission by being able to include everyone in the unit. And when you have someone that's going through something as severely personal as gender dysphoria, as has been discussed, it's actually quite relieving to see them become a useful member of the team, and you do that by including them. You do that by helping them work through their issues. This whole idea of you got to wait for them to have surgery and you got to have it's all that's all a red herring. That's not true. And so we actually have people taken down for longer. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you quickly make your point so I can let Elaine respond to it?
My point is that this isn't a problem. This is a manufactured problem from someone else's point of view. But as a commander in the military, this is not a problem. It never was a problem when we integrated gays and lesbians in the military, and this isn't going to be a problem either. That's my point. Thank you.
Elaine.
Okay. First of all, I understand the desire to personally support people who are confused about gender identity. That's a normal human response. But what you're saying about outsiders deciding what's best, you and I are really on the same side, because the LGBT activist groups are presuming, and they've been invited into the Pentagon to set up systems, what we started to talk about before the break, Service Central Coordination Cells, or SCCCs, that commanders are supposed to refer to whenever they run into problems, like, for instance, a soldier named Marty who says, I'm pregnant. This is one of several scenarios that are in the training documents. Now, the problem is this system is not really helpful because it politicizes the military health system. Whoever these experts are, and we need to find out exactly who they are, they will be in sync with the transgender ideology, which believes that gender is assigned at birth, not identified at birth, and who believe that you can change gender with superficial changes in appearance. Now, to me, that limits the choices and the superior medical services that everybody in the military is entitled to. We know that long-term studies have shown that surgeries have not improved the psychological problems underlying gender dysphoria, including high risk of suicide. So Johns Hopkins University that was pioneering in this field of sex reassignment surgery, they stopped the practice after 10 years because they saw it wasn't helping people work through the underlying psychological problem. So why are we forcing, and I do mean forcing, doctors and nurses to perform or participate in or approve the kinds of services and medical procedures that many consider unethical and not helpful? It's a bigger issue than just one-on-one relationships, but I do understand your concern about people on a one-to-one basis.
All right, Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today. We haven't had time to cover every part of this, so we'll have to do that probably in the near future because, as you said, this is imminent. And but I appreciate you joining me. And ladies and gentlemen, just go to the website. There's a lot to read if you click through to Elaine Donnelly's Center for Military Readiness. And weigh in with your member of Congress. I suggest you do that now. It's really Congress who needs to do something about this. Elaine, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Penn.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up we're going to talk about this issue where it touches children and pediatrics. We'll have an MD with us, and you won't want to miss it.
Partner with Point of View Radio, because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
The phones are open at 800-351-1212, and you can call in on some of the topics we've been discussing here on the program today. It's sort of surrounded the transgender agenda, and we're finding that it's anti-science, it's anti-privacy, and it's also anti-military readiness, which we discussed with Elaine Donnelly. And I think also, though, we need to add a component, and there's an article that's been out there this week that's just an important article, I think. I read it at the Daily Signal, which is the Heritage Foundation's news source. And the title of it is, I'm a Pediatrician, How Transgender Ideology Has Infiltrated My Field and Produced Large-Scale Child Abuse. The author is Michelle Cretella, MD, and she is my guest. Michelle, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I'm glad you're here to make some common sense. And, you know, we've been talking about the military, which is sort of a target on some of these issues because of their top-down structure. But in pediatrics, it's not so top-down. But why is this transgender agenda moving through your field?
Well, oddly enough, it is top-down.
Explain.
What the public does not understand is that the mainstream medical organizations do not represent the vast majority of physicians. And they don't take into account their membership practices and opinions. And this is particularly true of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Pediatric Endocrine Society, and also the American Psychological Association and Psychiatric Associations. They have small groups of committees that are often self-selected, and on matters of LGBT, many of the members of those committees have a record of LGBT activism and may also be LGBT themselves. Okay. So these organizations, which sit at the top of making medical recommendations to physicians at large, as well as medical schools and training programs, have been politicized. And that is a huge problem that the public is largely unaware of.
Well, that's absolutely true. And let me just give a few more details about our guest. Michelle Cretella is president of the American College of Pediatricians. She's a general pediatrician, and her interest is in behavioral pediatrics. And she has written an article, Gender Dysphoria in Children and Suppression of Debate. That was published in 2016 in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. And I think this article that we're looking at today, it's posted at pointofview.net, is important and will help people become aware, Michelle, of this issue. And, you know, the question I want to ask really is it been, since you published this one article last year and now this is out, and I know you're known to be sort of a common sense person in this field, have you experienced opposition?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In terms of a multitude of ad hominem attacks on the Internet and various papers, that's primarily been the extent of it. I have now, for the last 4 years, I have been working solely in advocacy for children and families, in part because I was experiencing some pressure in private practice.
Wow.
Despite the fact that I had, for example, lesbian couples in my practice, never had any complaints from them or other families. But just the fact that I stood up outside my professional time, outside my office time, I stood up for the fact that mothers and fathers are different and that children deserve the nurturing of a mother and father for optimal development. That alone made my employer uncomfortable, and there was one gay man from out of state, had nothing to do with our practice, who made harassing phone calls, and that was enough to intimidate, my practice. So,
so you're in advocacy now, and do you encourage? I mean, give us some of the science about it, because it just seems as if there's this, and I don't know how widespread this is numbers wise, but it seems like there's this opinion now that it's wrong to try to encourage parents to try to either ignore or counsel children out of the idea that they may be confused about their gender, or they may think they're another gender. But really the emphasis now, at least what we hear, is that, medical intervention right away, give them hormone blockers or puberty blockers, give them hormones and eventually surgery, do what you can to cater to this idea that they have. And that's where, we're very disturbed, and there's harm in that, isn't there?
Yeah. Now, parents are being bullied. They're being bullied by so-called experts in, they're being bullied by Hollywood, first of all, right, and the mainstream and the media. But they're being bullied by academics. They're being bullied by the education system from preschool forward. They're being bullied by physicians and therapists, you're right, who are telling these parents, hey, socially conforming, your little boy says he's a girl, hey, dress him as a girl, change his name, yes, make society accept him as a girl, then put him on blockers, because you know what? Dressing him up like a girl and having everyone treat him as a girl and putting him on blockers, that's fully reversible. No, there is no science to support that. And it's also contrary to common sense. I call it the Santa Claus effect. If we take our little children and we tell them to believe in Santa, and we have all the TV and the movies about Santa, and the schools support that, guess what? Our children believe in Santa. Okay, and these children who are convinced that, and they are repeatedly saying that they are the opposite sex, that is a symptom, that is a cry for help. There is something underlying. It doesn't have to be severe abuse going on in the family. Now, yes, in some cases, sadly, that is it. But there's such a thing as psychology. There's such a thing as little children having perceptions about family dynamics, about what's going on with peers. They can have perceptions that are wrong, that make them feel their biological sex is not who they are, that their biological sex is not safe, that their biological sex makes them unlovable. It's all subconscious. This can happen. And when they are affirmed to accept their biological sex,
that's what parents are for.
Either with parents or with therapists, they can be helped through this. The puberty blockers, they arrest a natural system.
And you say this can be permanent damage, medical damage to them?
Right, and it's permanent in this sense. It's permanent because when you affirm these kids socially, when you affirm their confusion socially, how is that going to help them come to accept their biological sex? When you put them on puberty blockers, you are arresting their brain development. You're arresting their bone development, and there's no proof that this is reversible. Okay, arresting bone development. What could that mean? It can mean that when they get into their 20s, they're going to have osteoporosis. Arresting brain development. What might that mean? Well, puberty blockers are safe to treat certain conditions in adults. And then when we look at adults, for example, puberty blockers are used to treat prostate cancer. Well, in men treated with the blockers for prostate cancer, they develop memory deficits, decision-making deficits. And the same thing has been found in adult women who are treated with puberty blockers for gynecologic problems. So to say that this is safe for children, this is ludicrous. Jazz Jennings is very prominent. Okay, here's a biological boy who's put on blockers and cross-sex hormones at a very young age, all according to the quote-unquote expert standards, he now has a micropenis. I'm sorry, it's not funny. It's not funny. I don't mean to laugh.
This is just serious business.
Yeah, this is serious.
Real.
This is real and serious because he has been told from when he was, I think, very young, even maybe age 3 or 5, something like that. That this is you are a girl trapped in a boy's body. Just follow our directions and you will be fine.
Dr. Michelle Cretella is with us. Michelle, we're going to take a quick break, continue after the break. You are absolutely right. This is child abuse. We'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. $3.25 million. That's the price one New Jersey town will pay for its religious discrimination. Not long ago on this program, I told you about the refusal of Bernards Township, New Jersey, to grant a building permit to the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey. The society fought City Hall for at least 4 years, having their application denied 9 separate times. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit against the township, alleging a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Department of Justice won just 2 months later. But by May 2017, the township decided to give up the fight, settle with the government, and allow the Islamic Society to build their mosque. This is good news for religious liberty. Though Bernards Township, in this case, used their zoning laws to prevent the building of a mosque, it could have just as easily been a synagogue, a church, a cathedral, or other house of worship. City governments cannot intentionally throw up permitting obstacles to religious organizations. They must treat a religious organization's application for land use just like it would any other land use application. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Dr. Michelle Cretella, and we are discussing a gender transition and just the agenda within the medical community now to affirm sort of the idea that someone might be trapped in the wrong body and using medical drugs and even surgeries to help them to realize that. It's almost like the emperor has new clothes. I want to take a quick call because we've got someone waiting who actually wants to talk about this agenda in the military. Let's go to Rachel, who's an Army veteran, listening on KYCC in California. Rachel, what's your comment?
Good afternoon. I would really like to hear a statistic, so I'll get to that in a minute. But yes, I was a field medic, in a combat unit in the Army. So I absolutely 100% disagree with this commanding officer in the Air Force, because the different branches of the military service, the armed forces, have different missions. So maybe it's okay in the Air Force, but it is not okay in the Army. I was part of the minority, being a woman in the military, especially being a medic. And so I sort of kind of know firsthand. And so it affects the morale, it affects your trust, it affects the unit, it affects everything. So I absolutely 100% disagree with the commander before that. But now that you're talking about it and the gender, I'm wondering, and I've been thinking about this, for gay parents to adopt a child, whether they be male or female, are they more prone to changing their gender identity because of their parents and their upbringing? Because the way I feel about it...
You mean the kids of gay parents?
Correct.
The children of gay parents?
Yes, if they are more apt to have a gender identity crisis, because I just know, reading my Bible, we war not against flesh and blood. I do not feel that this is something that we're being attacked as Christians on our morals and values and our religious viewpoints, but it's a spiritual warfare, and I feel like we are definitely losing in this battlefield. So I was just wondering if, eventually as parents adopt and then those children grow up and then those children grow up, what's going to happen is they don't procreate. And so I'm worried about that aspect, because we all know that by numbers, that's sort of kind of tactics and strategies. So I was just wondering the statistic on that.
Okay,
so
Rachel,
thank
you
so much for taking my call.
Thank you for calling and for your service and for making some points here. Dr. Cretella, the first question was gay parents, are they more likely to have children with gender dysphoria?
I have not seen studies looking specifically at gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder in with children of gay couples. However, there is an excellent review. It's called a meta-analysis published in 2010 by Dr. Walter Schum, and he found just dramatic evidence that teenage daughters of lesbian couples were almost 60% more likely than girls in the general population with heterosexual parents. Almost 60% greater chance of identifying as either lesbian or bisexual themselves.
Okay. Yeah.
And now the percentage was not quite so high for sons of gay fathers, but there was an uptick there in terms of sons of gay fathers. Actually, that may have been gay fathers and lesbian couples, gay male couples and gay lesbian couples of sons. There was an uptick there as well in terms of the sons identifying as attracted to the same sex. But the most dramatic increase was among the teenage girls of lesbian couples. So there probably is something to that.
What are you seeing with the regard to parents? Because you're a pediatrician, and parents, they might bring this to their pediatrician, the idea that my child is uncomfortable, and maybe they're playing with toys of the opposite sex. So it used to be that it was just a phase most of the time, and you could just try to do things to affirm their gender, their birth gender.
And that is, yeah. And
what's happening now?
I think we need to, I'm just going to call it the culture of death, because the last caller is definitely hitting on something even bigger. I mean, this is an issue that has medical, psychological, social, and spiritual aspects to it, no doubt. And so I lump it in with the same area as also abortion and euthanasia and those issues. Okay, this is a culture of death issue. Now, for parents who have children who, first of all, if they were just breaking the sex stereotypes, and it's best to use the word sex, just for clarity.
Okay, yeah. Gender's not a good word to use right now because it's been changed.
Because, you know what, linguistic engineering precedes the imposition of social agendas. It's a war of words first. So to be really clear, science talks about sex. Okay, XY chromosomes, you're a boy or a man, XX, you're a girl or a woman. So a child just breaking those stereotypes, that's not necessarily something to be concerned about. You may simply have a daughter who's a tomboy. And so as long as you're affirming her as a girl, and I always tell parents, hey, focus on character, especially. Focus on character. How's her relationship with you and dad and her peers? Okay, that's what we want to look at, not necessarily the stereotypes, the stereotypical toys. I have 4 kids. My daughter was the last, and ahead of her 3 brothers. She didn't play with dolls for ages. You know, I think she was 7 before she played with a doll. Prior to that, it was Batman, Spider-Man, action figures, and cars and trucks. However, when parents who call the American College of Pediatricians, and usually I'm the one who will speak with them or converse with by email, if there is a child who is a little boy, I cut my penis off. Girl, something really dramatic. I try to help that parent get connected with a therapist who will sit with the family and the child and do a very thorough evaluation, again, of relationships and perceptions. Most parents are not abusive parents. Most parents genuinely want what's best for the child, and something could be going on that just needs a solid therapist to sit down and say, all right, let's see what's beneath this.
It makes so much common sense. Listen, we are up on the end of the program, Michelle. I am so sorry that we haven't gotten to near the issues I wanted to talk with you about, but this is a good start, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's definitely a multifaceted issue and a difficult one to talk about because has become so politicized even within medicine and psychiatry.
Yeah, we need to bring common sense back into the equation, ladies and gentlemen. We try to do that here on Point of View. You can find out a lot more by going to pointofview.net. You can click through to the website for Michelle Cretella's organization, and I suggest you do that. We will see you tomorrow for our weekend edition. Thanks for joining me.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.